Ladies and gentlemen, the citizen scientist, Dave Feldman.
How's everyone doing tonight? All right. Many of you guys already know me, and I'm going to say that I still have no conflicts of interest, or more specifically, I don't make any money directly from any companies. However, I do want to give a little bit of credit where it's due. I do get some product and service support for my experiments from PTS Diagnostics, Keto&Co, and KetoChow. Both of the bottom two, of course, are also here as vendors. Now, some of you may have already known me. I'm a business developer and an entrepreneur, but I kind of consider myself first and foremost an engineer. I wrote my first line of code when I was 13. And this is me now, as I started keto at about April 2015, and I have to say, for half a year, I had the most blissful period of time. And then I got my cholesterol score. It shot up to 329, which obviously scared me quite a bit, and then everything kind of went dark. Now after that, I started to study everything that I could about cholesterol and the lipid system. And I knew what all of you guys know, right? Higher cholesterol means higher mortality, right? Everyone knows this? Well, actually, there were a few things that struck me right away. Now again, me being an engineer, I kind of break things down to the basics, which are, hey, the elderly population should be losing more and more people the higher their cholesterol goes. After all, there are other things like waist to hip ratio, blood pressure, insulin. These things, as they get progressively higher, there's a mortality curve, which I was not seeing immediately upon looking into the older population studies. Also, statins actually are excellent at lowering cholesterol. They're just terrible at lowering cardiovascular risk. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's an acronym, NNT, that's number needed to treat. So for every 104 people that are taking a statin, one of those will have a benefit. And if you think about it, we're not even talking about all of the detrimental effects that can come from statins as well. But probably my biggest pet peeve of all is the cholesterol studies often omit or conceal something known as all-cause mortality. And I can kind of illustrate why this is a big pet peeve of mine pretty quickly with what I like to call the incredible cyanide diet. Now, in this fictional study, in the control group, people died. A third of them died of cardiovascular disease, a third from cancer, and of course, many of the other suspects in typical fashion. But you know what? Only in the cyanide group, only 50 died of cardiovascular disease, 25 of cancer, and so forth, right? And there's this miscellaneous other category. To be honest, I think not everybody in the cyanide group followed the diet. Just saying it right now. So in the non-cyanide group, this looks reflective. And then we have this pie chart for the cyanide diet. But I can correctly say that only 1% died of infection. Only 1% died of cardiovascular disease. Only 1% died of Alzheimer's disease. You get the picture. You can't remove one group without talking about who lived longer. That should be a requirement for every diet study that touts any mortality based on any metric. All right, so how about the lipid system itself? Well, naturally, as I started looking more and more into it, as an engineer, I felt like I kept seeing a very familiar pattern, something that we would call a network. The liver, the lipoproteins, everything as they all interacted with each other seemed to have something that I could definitely identify with. In fact, I jokingly say that the human body has been doing cloud computing long before we were. So at that point, in November 2015, I decided to dedicate myself to testing as much as possible. And so this is basically my journey up to now. And I'm telling you, I'm going to have a bit of a bombshell of data that I'll get to drop at the end. And to give you a little bit of a hint, I made you all complicit in my most recent experiment. So, firstly, you should know everything I ingest gets photographed. How many people in the audience actually know me personally or have eaten with me? Just show of hands. Okay, of those people that have eaten with me, how many have seen me ingest something that I did not take a picture of? Exactly. To show you how serious I am, I will pay anybody $100 if they catch me ingesting something I did not take a picture of. Take that with you for the rest of the conference. In conjunction with this, I've done 77 blood tests in the last 21 months. This is over a series of several different successive experiments. If you go to my blog, you'll see what all the experiments are, but I'm going to share a few of them with you here soon. The main thing is I want to emphasize how serious I was about getting all of this data together to show you the first leg of my research, as I call the inversion pattern. Simply put, the more fat you eat, the lower your cholesterol. So, if I were to read this verbatim, this new research suggests 30 to 50% of your cholesterol test scores are almost entirely influenced by the dietary fat you've eaten in a 3-day window before the test. This pattern is also an inversion for LDL cholesterol. And the remaining 50 to 70% of the cholesterol scores appear to be highly influenced by dietary energy composition, exercise, and metabolic status. So, to kind of briefly state it, all things being equal, the higher your dietary fat, the lower your cholesterol. But why? Well, before I get into that, I want to get into the anatomy of a lipoprotein. You've already heard about them a lot throughout this conference, but I want to break it down to just these 3 things in particular. There's the boat itself, which is generally referred to as an LDLP within the blood test. There's the triglycerides, often shortened to trigs, and then there's the cholesterol itself. Now, there's actually many other things inside a lipoprotein, but these are the 2 payloads we're going to focus on, and they are the biggest payloads generally. So I want to ask real quick, how many of you guys are already focusing on cholesterol? Okay. What should you be focusing on? What's the biggest payload? Triglycerides. Somebody savvy tell me, what are triglycerides? Triglycerides are energy. It's 3 fatty acids bundled together for energy, and you should continue thinking about it as energy, because ultimately this is an energy distribution system. Okay, so here is 9 months of data from last year that started at November of 2015, and sure enough goes all the way across. You can see on the left axis is the dietary fat that I've had for 3 days at a time. And on the right axis, the blue line, you can see what the corresponding LDL-C was, LDL cholesterol. So you can see how much the 3-day window of dietary fat impacted the LDL-C. When I flip the axes on this left side so it's inverted, you can now see the inversion for yourself. The correlation is astonishing, right? So let me actually kind of break it down for you. Dietary fat inversion for LDL-C, if I were to get my blood drawn this morning, as of right now, send it off to the lab, what I would look at is, this morning's Saturday, I'd look at yesterday, Friday, the day before that, Thursday, and the day before that, Wednesday. And those 3 days would have enormous influence on what my resulting LDL-C would be for the blood test from this morning. A 3-day window also appeared to apply to LDL-P, the particle count, but only through a lot of rapid testing did we find that actually it has a little bit of a 2-day gap. There's still a 3-day window, but we would ignore Friday and Thursday and go back to Wednesday, Tuesday, and Monday. And here's a graph to sort of substantiate that. You can see here, likewise, on the dotted orange, that's the 3-day window that we talked about, but now with a 2-day gap. And the purple line would represent the LDL-P cholesterol. And if I flip that axis again, you can see how tight the inverse correlation is. So, now you got to ask why. Well, this is an Occam's razor theory behind it, and it's more of a systems theory than it is a specific set of pathways. So, it's pretty simple. Before we get started, I've got to say what everyone on a low-carb, high-fat diet needs to know. An LDL particle, a low-density lipoprotein, it has many jobs, tons of jobs. Could talk for hours on that, but its primary job is to distribute energy from fat. Let me put that in all caps, boldface, underline. Actually, let me go ahead and extrude it in 3D, highlight it in neon, and go ahead and have a blinking arrow to really emphasize, when they leave the dock, they're primarily filled with triglycerides, and they will drop those triglycerides off for the hungry cells that need it. All right. This is an analogy everybody likes, so I'm going to keep using it. This is a cruise ship. If the cruise ship is the boat and it's the LDLP, what are the triglycerides? The passengers, yes. Okay, in this case, what is the cholesterol? It's the life rafts. Now, it would be incorrect for me to say that the purpose, the primary job of a cruise ship is to move around life rafts, right? The primary job of a cruise ship is to move around passengers. And you can see this by the activity of the cruise ship. Every time it docks, passengers are coming in and off constantly. However, you wouldn't get on a cruise ship that didn't have life rafts. So it is a job of a cruise ship to carry around life rafts, and you definitely want them in the case of an emergency. In many respects, this is the role of what cholesterol is within the system. Okay, now we got to break this up into two different groups. Low-density lipoproteins come in two varieties. First one is from the gut, from food you just ate. Food you just ate, they're typically known as chylomicrons. And I like to call them sprinters, and that's because pretty quickly they run around the system, they drop off the triglycerides. Even for as big as they start, they turn to a chylomicron remnants, and they get absorbed by the liver, and they're just gone. Minutes to hours at the most. But then there's this second category, and the second category is what comes from storage, typically from the liver, is the VLDLs. Very low density lipoproteins. And I call these guys the distance runners. And that's because even though, just like the chylomicrons, they very quickly drop off their triglycerides, they then kind of go on patrol for a much longer period of time. They're sort of like the Energizer Bunny. They'll go for 2 to 4 days. Why is this so relevant? This is so relevant because if you followed me up to this point, if you've ever had a cholesterol test, you've probably had it fasted. So you got it at around 12 to 14 hours. If you did, it's only picking up the cholesterol in this second category. So, it's pretty simple. Why is it moving up and down in total between chylomicrons and VLDLs? Well, it makes perfect sense. It appears as though the body is looking backwards in a 3-day window and saying, in this case, oh, Dave's eating lots and lots of fat, lots of incoming energy. Therefore, don't really need to have as much fat mobilized from storage, right? Conversely, if I'm not bringing in a lot of fat, especially if I'm fasting, body has a lot of reason to mobilize energy from storage, and therefore it brings up the VLDLs. Again, you're getting your cholesterol taken from the VLDLs because they're still around when you're in a fasted state. All right, so let's talk about this demonstrated last year. Last year is when I actually had a demonstration that I wrapped around the very first presentation of my data, which I call the extreme drop experiment, but a lot of people just call it the Feldman protocol. This is me literally on October 9th saying the blood test that I got on October 7th is going to show a much, much higher amount of cholesterol than what my test is about to show on October 10th, which hadn't yet happened at the point that I was doing this presentation. So this is the timeline. It's pretty simple. I ate very low amount of food, very low amount of calories, but still low carb, high fat for the first 3 days, took my blood test, went into the weekend, and then gorged on enormous amounts of fat for the next 3 days. And sure enough, my numbers plummeted. My total cholesterol dropped 66 points. My LDL-C dropped 73 points. LDL-P cut almost in half. And small, dense LDL-P, which you hear about all the time, had moved to a place where it's basically immeasurable, under 90. Now, after I did that, a lot of people wanted to test this protocol. So I wrote it up on my site, mentioned, hey, it doesn't constitute medical advice, but here's what it is, and I suspect it's going to work for many other people, if that's what they're trying to do. And thus far, as of this morning, it has about an 86% success rate for those people who have actually tried it. All right, now let's go ahead and take this back to the Keto Fest experiment where we got to get a lot of people to do this protocol. So this took place in July 11th through 13th. Everybody who was going to participate had to bring down their total amount of low-carb, high-fat diet to a low-calorie amount, or it could fast altogether. We had the requisite fasting phase. Then many people arrived that weekend on that Friday morning, and then we all had our blood test on Friday, July 14th. And then because it was Keto Fest, everybody pigged out on enormous amounts of fat before we finally had our second blood test that took place on Monday, July 17th. So what happened? Well, before we got started, I made sure to post my hypothesis in advance of the experiment, which, by the way, I wish more science would do. I see too often experiments collect data and then shape a narrative based on what it is after the fact. This is the PTS Diagnostics team, who I thank a lot for helping out with the service and product. And this is us eating a lot of food. You might recognize the presenter that's going to be following me. That's Amber here in the picture, and this is after we ate enormous amounts of fat through the weekend. And these are the results. 22 people that we were able to collect. Of the, yes, 23 technically, but I only have 22 that are in this graph. And you can see, I don't even know what it's doing right now. It went backwards and upside down. Well, I say you can see, but maybe you can't see. That's how hardcore they are about trying to shut down my research. I'm kind of impressed, honestly. You know what, I can actually probably state a lot of this from memory, this part here. But basically what you're going to see, that's the spot. What you're going to see is what I like to call the tilted ladder. That basically many of the people started out, okay, I'm going to bring it forward just one, there we go. Many of the people that started out on the left side, which is that Friday where the blood tests were taken, wherever they started, they dropped down to the right side, as in everybody's cholesterol generally dropped. Now, 3 people saw an increase of 1 to 2%, 3 people out of the 22. The remaining 19 saw a decrease of between 5 and 38% of their LDL-C after eating a whole weekend of enormous amounts of fat. I was genuinely stunned by the results, even though I was kind of predicting it. Because to be honest, up until this point in time, for as much as I keep running into this data myself, I still can't believe it for my own sake. You can actually just skip past the slide if you're able to get to it. Well, they're dealing with some of the technical difficulties. Anyway, what happens after that is actually some data that I'm really excited to show you, but unfortunately it's genuinely hot off the presses. It's something where I basically was able to maintain my total dietary calories at 3,000 starting at Thursday of last week. And in order to achieve this, I wanted to be sure that I broke it down to just a total of 2 variables. One of those variables, I wanted to make a complete meal replacement. Thus is why I'm appreciative of Ketola and I'm appreciative of Keto Chow, because both of them have been able to help me out and being able to allow for one particular variable to be the one that gets changed. And then the intervention variable can only be that which gets changed by what it is that happens. Not quite an elegant way of putting it, but basically that's what ends up occurring. So it started on Thursday of last week, and I'd gone up until Sunday of literally a week ago tomorrow. And at that point in time, I replaced 500 calories of the 3,000 calories I was having per day of the keto shake. Now what you'll see when I get the visuals back is that the data that I was taking every day from the cardio check showed that my cholesterol was generally stable and held at around a total of, I want to say maybe 300, 305. And my LDL was something in the neighborhood of, I want to say 220, 240, something along those lines. As of course my LDL is unusually high for being a hyper-responder. Well, I then do the intervention of replacing 500 calories with, I'll tell you in a moment, but not yet, on Sunday, and then on Monday of this week, I replaced 1,000 calories so that I had 2,000 calories of the shake, 1,000 calories of this intervention variable. And then I went back to doing the keto shake for 2 days following that. And then, of course, I came here. So I actually wasn't able to bring the keto shake with me because unfortunately I couldn't travel with the oils and I only had carry-on baggage. So I went ahead and came here and pretty much picked out on a lot of the great food that's here. But generally tried to hold to at about 3,000 calories per day up until yesterday, where I really had a lot of fatty meats. And gosh, I have some great visuals to show you on what those numbers look like once they finally come up. But I'll say this. I'll say that this morning, I've had the lowest cholesterol score of all the scores taken throughout this entire period of time that I've been researching this. And the bottom line is this. The bottom line is this. I showed you one arm that was the inversion pattern, that all things being equal, energy stasis being equal, the more fat you have that you eat, the lower your cholesterol score, because I'm basically evening out the pond, if you will. The second thing that I'm going to be showing you relates back to lean mass hyperresponders. Hyperresponders who are lean mass have something very unusual about them. They have low adipose tissue, but they also have low glycogen stores. I shouldn't say low glycogen stores, I should say lower relative glycogen stores than somebody who's topping off their glycogen stores constantly. Because of that, there's more of an incentive on the part of the body to mobilize those fat stores. That's why I believe there's more of a push towards there being VLDLs in action. And that's why I'm not as concerned about it. Because again, the triglycerides that I was showing you before, those are the currency of energy in mobilization, right? That's actually what's moving along throughout the body. And with less total adipose stores to be able to work with those triglycerides, they need to go directly more often to the muscle tissue. Now, again, I also have a good slide for this also, but you're just gonna have to trust me on this one. This is what I played off of in order to be able to make this manipulation. Because the intervention that I made use of was that I actually just added bread. Whole wheat, heart-healthy bread. 500 calories of which I did on Sunday, and then another 1,000 calories of which I did on Monday. Now, if you thought that all I did was inhibit insulin in the remaining period of time, and therefore it should have equalized back out, you'd be surprised to find that no, the reason I did it that early and then stopped and went back to the keto shakes is because after that point in time, I knew whatever amount of glycogen stores that I had within my, oh, there we go. Whatever amount of glycogen stores that I needed in my liver to then make the body confident in the hold on one sec, let me see if I can get this going. We'll give it a sec because it could be a delay. There we go. All right. So going back to the KetoFest experiment, here's the graph. Here's the average change of LDL-C of negative 16% across the board, and a mean drop, once you averaged everyone to 25.7 milligrams per deciliter. All right. I also did want to mention this before we get off the inversion pattern. I did want to say why this changes everything. The inversion pattern, again, with all things being equal, assume somebody has the same diet. This is why we need to be able to know whether it impacts somebody who is on a low-carb diet or not, is because many people reduce dietary fat or even attempt an extended multi-day fast coming up on a cholesterol score. How many people do you know who got a bad cholesterol score, that their doctor said, well, we'll see what it looks like in 6 months. Hopefully it gets better. And then what do? They bring down their saturated fat in anticipation of the bad score, or they do a multi-day fast, not realizing they're actually spiking it. It's terrible. And unfortunately, conversely, many who feel their medication or therapy is protective may actually have more dietary fat in the expectation it is less relevant, in which case they would actually be bringing down their score. Okay, and then finally, and I know this ruffles a lot of feathers, but it's got to get studied. Those at or nearing end-of-life care often experience a reduced appetite. If the inversion pattern applies to them, I'm actually surprised there's not more all-cause mortality associated with higher cholesterol, if in fact the inversion pattern applies. It's that simple. All right. Lastly, inversion pattern in previous studies, I actually had a number of slides I had associated with this. I threw it out to just put up this one paragraph. It's very simple. Every cholesterol study that doesn't tightly control for dietary fat in the 3 days before the blood draws may be ignoring the biggest confounder. And unfortunately, I find that often many of these cholesterol studies are based on dietary surveys. And surveys I really have an issue with. So this is what I was talking about before with lean mass hyperresponders. On a low-carb diet, you typically have lower, and I don't mean low, lower glycogen stores relative to somebody who's on a carb-centric diet, especially if you're an athlete. And per the talk that was before mine, muscle glycogen can be well spared, right? But outside of that, there's definitely more of an interest on the part of the body to upregulate use of fat as opposed to glucose. Also, you have a lower body fat, therefore having lower adipose stores. And then finally, you have higher energy demands as an athlete. So you have two tanks that are generally a bit lower, yet you have higher energy demands. It makes a lot of sense for it to circulate more energy for bioavailability. And often this profile shows as an LDL of 200 or higher. Oftentimes I've seen them as much as 300 or 400. And LDL, HDLs of 80 or higher oftentimes can be 100 or more. And triglycerides often super super small. All right, so obviously I've kind of not buried the lead and went ahead and showed you, and I'm gonna kind of move through these pretty quickly. This was literally a blow-by-blow, as you can see, on Thursday, Friday, and then finally on Saturday. And then on Sunday is where I went ahead and did the intervention phase, right? This is from this last week. And you can see with my total cholesterol at 295, my calculated LDL at 220. This was actually the lowest of the ones that were moving up and down. But after I start the intervention, you can watch it taking place in real time. My total cholesterol just keeps dropping and dropping. So what happened? All that happened was I changed days 4 and 5 and added the bread. But since then, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then this morning, after last night having a lot of fatty meats, pure keto, these are my numbers. Taken from this morning that I made sure to add as a slide. My total cholesterol is 207, HDL-C 52, calculated LDL-C of 131, the population average for men my age, right? Here's the key. The key is my triglycerides are now 118. 118. Let me go back one slide. Oh, actually, I'm gonna have to go forward one slide. Here we go. This is the graph all the way. If you look at it from left to right, look at my triglycerides all the way through. Fully keto adapted, right? My triglycerides are very low, very typical of a lean mass hyperresponder. But now now that I'm leaving the gate, we're seeing my triglycerides go up even though my LDL is going down. So the takeaway, and I realize we kind of went all over the place due to the interruption and so forth, it's actually fairly simple. There's just the inversion pattern, right? All things being equal, LDL cholesterol will decrease with more dietary fat and increase with less dietary fat in general. And secondly, there's the energy status of the body. The body appears less likely to traffic as many LDL particles when there are higher energy stores like glycogen. In short, it's all about the energy regulation. That's it. Now, I want to fit in just a couple thank yous real quick. Special thanks, by the way, to two people who have been really helping me out a lot with cholesterolcode.com, Siobhan and Craig, thank you so much. And I want special acknowledgments. Thank you to everyone who's performed the protocol and reported back the data. I apologize, I've actually lost count. It's now somewhere above 70. It may actually be approaching 100, but hopefully Craig will help me isolate down and narrow down everybody. I also wanted to thank everyone who's helping me move this research through academia. And finally, I want to thank everyone who has donated on the website research to cholesterolcode.com. I proactively avoid taking any money whatsoever from any corporate entity because I care about the integrity of the research. So this is all entirely funded by you. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey Dave, can I give you a plug? I just want to give.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I want the audience to know just how groundbreaking Dave's work is. I had a conversation with Dr. Finney about 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about this very topic, and this is groundbreaking. It's like, if you heard my talk yesterday, I was talking about LDL. We see this in these ultra-endurance athletes who run 100 miles on 800, 1,000 calories. And Dr. Finney's comment about the FASTER studies, which is this groundbreaking study on keto-adapted athletes, they're actually in a quandary because the low-carb diet cohort all have elevated VLDLs, and they're kind of scared to publish the results because it doesn't fit with the current body of science.
That's true, and thank you so much, Peter. By the way, I want to emphasize real quick, Peter was one of the first people that I talked to, immediately was picking up a lot of what I was saying going back to low-carb veil of last year, particularly as it related back to athletes. And per what you're talking about before, a lot of people are coming from an overweight standpoint and going down. I see that their patterns generally show an improvement per perception of cholesterol. But if you're already starting from a place of metabolic health, it's more likely your LDL-C will go higher. But that makes mechanistic sense for everything we talked about here today. Go ahead.
So Dave, I just want to tell you, echo some of the things that Peter said, and that is that the contribution that you have made to lipidology is tremendous. And you have helped a countless number of patients. And if this is something that was done by a physician, you would be put as a leading researcher presenting at the plenary sessions of American College of Cardiology or American Heart Association. So, and countless number of my patients have been helped by your work. So, I have tremendous admiration for you.
Thank you so much.
But I have one question too, and you have addressed it slightly in your talks. Now, high LDL levels, many people, all the experts say is bad. But in your homeostatic evaluation, you think that that is not necessarily bad, and there are many reasons for it. And I don't know if you want to expand on one or two of those reasons.
Yes, actually, first of all, I want to be a good scientist, which is why I never state, and I may never state, just because of how many hats LDL particles wear, I never state that I'm sure that there's not a net detrimental outcome to having higher LDL-C or LDL-P. And frankly, I get more concerned about people who say that they insist they do know that. Because once again, getting back to what I was saying as far as the test failings that I saw early on, it didn't make sense to me. But per what you were talking about, Nadir, yes, there are other reasons LDL particles can be elevated, and it's worth looking into that with your doctor. For example, if you have an infectious event, your LDL particles could be elevated, and that is in fact a bad reason for them to be elevated, not because the LDL particle elevation is the bad reason, but because of why they're elevated is the bad reason. So you want to get a complete picture. Go ahead.
And first, how are you finding the accuracy and precision of the CardioCheck machine?
Sorry, say that again?
How are you finding the accuracy and precision of the CardioCheck machine?
It's a little early to say because I've really just been using it for about a month and a half. But I will say it's consistent with the numbers they've showed me internally. As far as I know, the problem is I have to get a lab test along with each of the CardioCheck tests. And that seems to be, I want to say, and it's, again, a bit early to say, but I want to say it's within 5 to 7% of a variation thus far.
Okay, I see Brian sneaking up here, so I'm going to track you
Yes.
down afterwards for another question.
Okay.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you so much. Dave will be over here. He can answer any questions.